Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello, and thank you for tuning into the GSMC Relationship Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network, and I am your host, Giovanna. Oh my goodness, it has been really crazy for me the last few weeks. Basically, I'm trying to drop down to part-time at my job to focus on stuff that, I actually enjoy. So it's been really hard for me to get these hourly podcasts out twice a week. So yeah, I do want to apologize for that. But I'm hoping now, I had some craziness happening, and I was going on a road trip, and don't worry, it was all done safely, as per COVID guidelines. And my car just decided that it didn't want to work anymore. So yeah, it's been a little stressful. And I am recording in a new space, so I'm hoping that the sound quality is just as good. But this week, we're going to be talking about can cannabis, also known as marijuana, also known as weed, help you with relationships and with your sex life. There isn't a lot of studies out there right now because it's still considered a Schedule I drug. But I did find a pretty cool article talking about it and discussing about it. And there has been some studies. There just hasn't been a lot, just because you need specific you need a special permit to gain marijuana, or also known as cannabis, which we'll talk about a little bit later, about how you really should refer to as cannabis and not marijuana. But we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to be talking about how to not get defensive during an argument, which can be really hard if you're in the middle of an argument. And the last one is, I am a big Halloween person. I love Halloween. It's like my favorite holiday. And we're going to be talking about 10 couples costumes for Halloween. These are going to be some that are easy. They're going to be ones that you can find cheaply. There are going to be other ones that you can pick from too, but I'm hoping that they're going to be a little bit more unique. And so this will get you the ideas ready for Halloween. We might not have a traditional Halloween thanks to COVID, but it still might be fun to just get dressed up and maybe have like a Zoom party with your friends where you watch Halloween movies together and make cookies. I honestly can't think of a better time than that. So, weed and relationships. I have learned recently that marijuana is actually a word that was formed in racism. Now, many years ago, in the U.S. at least, and I would assume everywhere else, cannabis was grown everywhere. Everyone used it. They mostly used it for paper and for rope. And it was really strong, and it was biodegradable. And they were business people who did not like cannabis, and they wanted to take over, they sell more of their rope and more of their paper. And so they kind of demonized it and they made it sound like it was some foreign thing that was coming from outside. So they called it cannabis, or I'm sorry, oh my bad. The original word is cannabis, to call it. That's the scientific term for weed or for marijuana. But they called it marijuana because marijuana is going to sound more foreign. It's going to sound more exotic. It's going to sound like it's coming from Africa with the slaves that we were bringing over. It's going to sound like it's from, somewhere that isn't populated with a lot of white people. So they referred to it as marijuana, and that term stuck, and it's actually because of a racist history is why we call it marijuana now. So whenever I talk about cannabis, I like to call it what it is, which is cannabis. So that's a little tip for you and a cool thing to look into. And like I kind of said in the introduction, there has not been a lot of studies on how cannabis affects your I guess, sexuality and how it affects your relationship with other people. Just because it's hard to get cannabis to study with. But some stuff that I know about it, and I'm sure a lot of people, I know there are many people who know way more about this than what I do. But in the cannabis plant, everybody knows THC. THC is the thing that gets you high. But there's also a lot of other stuff that is in the cannabis plant. There's CBD. CBD is getting a lot of, news right now because it is a component of the cannabis plant that, before I get into CBD, CBD is a cannabinoid, and we actually have a cannabinoid system in our bodies. And what the cannabinoid system in our bodies is regulates a lot of, it will regulate our sleep, anxiety, pain, all that other stuff. So, there has been some studies coming out recently. Again, it's still being studied. There's nothing that's saying that, yep, this is the miracle drug, this is what it works. And also keep in mind, if something cures everything, it cures nothing. So that is something to do with pseudoscience. But CBD is still kind of being studied, and I don't think we won't fully know all the things that CBD has to offer. If it offers anything, I believe it offers something, because I have used CBD and it seems to help, and I know people who use CBD that likes to use it. Is it a placebo effect? It could be, but a placebo effect works, I guess. The only thing is, the placebo effect becomes a problem when people are being swindled out of their money, and not they're taking that instead of going to a doctor and getting serious scientific help. But if it works for you and the money doesn't bother you, because sometimes CBD can be very expensive, go right ahead. But so there's CBD. There's also CBG. CBG is a stem cell, it is the stem cell. CBG is the stem cell in the cannabis plant that can turn into many other things. It could turn into THC, could turn into CBD. It could also turn into the flavonoids in the cannabis plant. Flavonoids is another part of the cannabis plant that is it actually gives the cannabis plant the distinct smell that it has. And also people are going to think of the skunky smell. But cannabis also kind of reminds me of wine, where there's going to be different types of plants and different strains that are going to have different smells. And that all comes from the flavonoids and the terpenes that are inside the plant. Plants are really complex. Just looking into what I looked into, I don't fully understand it yet. I'm not a biologist. So all of this stuff is kind of confusing to me. But what I'm trying to get across is that there is a lot more to the cannabis plant than just THC, the thing that gets you high. And also, in history, when we were growing cannabis all the time and using it to make rope and paper and stuff like that, it actually had a really low THC content. So if you smoked it, you probably wouldn't get you want to get the psychological effects. You want to get the physical or the physiological effects that you would if you went to a dispensary, if cannabis is legal in your state or legal where you live, and bought some of the stuff and smoked it. Now it is grown to have a high THC content because humans are always trying to see what we can get the best out of something. So that all comes into biological engineering. It's something we've always done as a species. That's how we are able to get different type of corn plants and different types of everything. So we grow cannabis right now to make the most money out of it. And right now to do that, you have to have a plant that has a high THC content. But that wasn't always the case. So smoking cannabis or ingesting cannabis, because, there's also edibles and stuff like that, can this help with your sex life and in your relationship? For some people, they say it's yes. But for a lot of it, it's hard because it's self-reported. And because cannabis has such a negative connotation to it, it might be hard for people to say, yes, I have, smoked this Schedule 1 drug and I had, sex with it or it has helped my relationship. Sometimes that can be a sore and uncomfortable topic to talk about. Now, in the U.S., which is where I'm at, I know in Canada it is legal, and in some European countries it's legal. It can be really difficult because we are in a country where there are states where the recreational use of cannabis is legal. And then there are some states where it is decriminalized, but the recreational use isn't legal. And then there are other states where the medical use is legal, but because it's a Schedule 1 drug, the federal government says there is no medical use associated with it, but there are many states who use it strictly for medical use. So it is crazy here in the U.S., the whole thing about it. But can it be good for relationships and for your sex life? So it's important to remember that correlation does not equal causation. What that means basically is when somebody does a survey, and this is when a lot of misleading headlines you'll see about recent survey shows that people with carpeting in their home tend to live longer. Now let's break that down. So there was an actual study that came out, and there was an actual news article that came out saying that if you have carpet in your home, you are going to live longer. So the correlation showed that, if you have carpeting in your home, those people are going to live longer than the people who have no carpeting in their home. Now, this was when carpeting was a little bit more popular. Now, millennials are really bringing out the nice hardwood floors that were put underneath those carpets. But the study wanted to say that, if you have that carpeting, you're going to live longer. But let's break that down a little bit. Think about the person in the 90s who could afford to put carpeting in their home, because carpeting costs money. It's not free. You have to go and get that nice plush carpeting from, your local hardware store, wherever. And those people, if they can afford carpeting and to carpet their own house, they can probably afford good health care. They can probably afford healthy food. They probably have an education, and they know how to take care of themselves. They know they've come from a household that can support them to go to school and to get a job and that kind of thing. People who can't afford to have carpeting in their house probably might not live as long as those other people because they have, they might not have the money to afford good health care and healthy food, and might engage in some more life-threatening activities and also not very healthy stuff that the person with carpeting would have. So that is a good example of why correlation does not equal causation. So going back to some of these studies, we know that cannabis can help with anxiety and pain. So just using that, you could probably figure out, or at least put two and two together, of why that would help some people have a more enjoyable time while having sex. Because, specifically for women, let's say endometriosis is a really not problematic, but it's a tough disease because that's going to make it sometimes painful to have sex. And also people with anxiety might have a hard time shutting off their brain while having sex. And, it's really hard to reach a climax and orgasm if you have other stuff you're thinking about on your brain. And sometimes if you're someone who is extremely anxious, smoking cannabis or ingesting cannabis in some way might be able to help you with that. But there is no specific link in research that has been directly linking cannabis to like enjoying your sexual or just sexual enjoyment in general. And that, again, that's because it's a Schedule I drug and we can't do studies on it. At least it's really hard to do studies on it. So all of the studies that have been done have mostly been self-reported studies. And like I said, that can be problematic if people aren't truthful on those studies. And it's also really hard to figure out, like, okay, so let's say you have a huge population study with 200 people. Of those 200 people who have smoked cannabis, of that fraction of the original 200 people, how many people have had sex while smoking cannabis or after smoking? And how many of those people have found enjoyment and found if cannabis has helped with them with their relationship and have helped with their sexual relationships and stuff like that. So it's really hard. We also don't know of those people who have smoked cannabis what kind it was, if it had a higher THC content, if this is scary, if it was laced with anything. There has been reports of cannabis getting laced with fentanyl or and other types of nasty stuff. So yeah, it's difficult to figure out if there is a link between sexual enjoyment and smoking cannabis and ingesting cannabis. And there are different types of ways to consume cannabis. Obviously, you can smoke it, but you can also eat it, like was it an edible. There's also THC concentrates, so think of like vape pens, and there's also like dabs, which are concentrates and stuff like that. So what was the thing that they had taken, and how did that affect them? So more problems with self-reporting surveys. When there can be self-reported surveys, and there have been self-reported surveys that have shown a positive correlation between cannabis use and sexual enjoyment, but it can be a very self-reporting bias. So think about the people who are going to be excited to talk about, or excited and willing to take a survey about cannabis and sexual relationships. Those people are more likely going to have a positive experience or past experiences with cannabis. And those are going to be self-selecting populations. So it can be kind of hard. Also in 1979, there was a journal published, and researchers asked a group of 84 graduate students about what they thought about the relationship between cannabis and sex. And 78% of them were male. Every single participant was white. And those who had firsthand experience of the topic was only 39% of the population. So of the 84 graduate students, less than half of them even had experience with cannabis. All of them were white, and a majority of them were male. So that goes to show that is like one of the bigger studies that has happened, and it was not a very diverse study and a diverse population. And then this is a quote, only those who were experienced smokers also strongly believe that it increased the intensity of an orgasm and that it should be considered an aphrodisiac. And the groups agreed that cannabis increases overall sexual pleasure, but the ones who were like the experienced smokers believed that. And it did include this study did include a small number of participants who actually had firsthand experience using cannabis for sex, and the majority of them were young and male. So it's not really clear if those findings would really translate to the general public. Because too, the fact that cannabis is a Schedule I drug has mostly affected poor communities of color for the illegality of it and for putting people in jail. It has mostly been poor people of color who have been affected by those laws. So it's hard to tell if these findings, especially in 1979, or I'm sorry, it was published in 1984, whether those people would have, the same experience with cannabis than maybe a person of color would. So it's definitely something to think about, and it has a lot of social implications as well. So all that fun stuff. The good news, though, is in 2017, there was a huge study published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine, and this is far more representative. But before we get into that, we're actually going to pause for a quick sponsor break. And once we're back, I will talk all about that 2017 study. We'll be right back.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
And welcome back. So in this 2017 study, the thing that they tried to do to combat the self-selecting bias of people are more likely to complete a survey about cannabis if they had positive experience with cannabis already. So in this study, instead of asking people anything about how their sex lives interact with their drug use, the researchers just made questions that casually asked about their sex life and also their drug use, but not how the two were related. So there were just questions of both kinds on there. They did find in that 2017 study that people who reported using cannabis monthly, weekly, or daily reported slightly more frequent sex than those who had never smoked. And women in particular who use cannabis daily had an average of 7.1 sexual encounters in the previous 4 weeks compared to 6 for those who had never used it. But this study can't really be used as to whether these these sexual interactions had more enjoyment and more satisfaction. So we can't use that study to find that correlation. But this study did have a large number of participants, but the problem is they could only use the data that had already been collected. So basically what that means is that they already had the answers and they couldn't really... They didn't make a specific connection between cannabis and their sexual satisfaction. But this study kind of inspired a different study to come about, specifically because that study found that women in particular have more sexual interactions if they smoke or if they use cannabis more frequently. So they wanted to ask women in general. So, Becky Lynn, she's a doctor, and she's the director of the Center for Sexual Health. She's also a professor of gynecology at St. Louis University. She wanted to ask women directly, what did they think about marijuana and how it improved their sex life and how cannabis improved their sex life. So because she worked as a professor of gynecology, she worked with other people in her practice to make a survey asking about cannabis usage with regards to sex. And so the cool thing about this survey compared to the one in 2017 was that these questions directly linked cannabis and your sex life. So they wanted to ask about whether or not it had any effect on sex drive, orgasm, lubrication, pain, and the overall sexual experience. And how they did that is she went to more than 30 experts at the center who are OBGYNs like her. And but it wasn't just gynecologists. They were obstetricians, urogynecologists, gynecological oncologists, and reproductive endocrinology and infertility specialists. I'm so happy I was able to get that all out of my mouth. But basically, every patient who saw any doctor in this center who went to any of those specialists got this survey. In the end, they ended up collecting 373 surveys, and of those 373 respondents, 176 reported ever using cannabis, with about half of them reporting frequent use, anywhere from once a week to several times a day, and half of them reporting infrequent use, anywhere from once a year to a few times a year. And 127 of the 176 cannabis users reported ever using cannabis before sex. So this was really important information because we finally had a large sample. Now, again, a majority of the participants were primarily white and heterosexual, and these were mostly women, if not all women, if I'm reading this correctly. So still something to keep in mind, but compared to, at least that now we have, that 1984 survey about, with primarily young white men. Now we have, primarily white women, so still not great. And again, cannabis has a lot to do with race, in the history of the war on drugs and things like that. So it is important to think about and to talk about. But until, cannabis is not a Schedule I drug, we can't do really any, medical studies on it and how it affects us in different types of ways. So kind of like what I said before, we don't really know if cannabis has a mechanism of why it would help you have better sex. But there are some things that could theoretically impact your sexual experiences while using cannabis. So this is a direct quote from the article it's called "How Does Cannabis Actually Affect Sex?" It was written by Sarah Jacoby and was published March 25th, 2019 on self.com. And your body's endocannabinoid system may have quite an impact on why cannabis could impact your sex life. So there are a significant amount of receptors for those endocannabinoid compounds in areas of the brain that deal with sexual function. So this is from the Dr. Lynn. She was the person who was the professor of gynecology, and she did the report for women who were coming into the doctor's offices. But Dr. Lynn says, such as the oblongata and the hypothalamus, there are going to be endocannabinoids in those parts of the brain, and recent research suggests that 2-AG, an endocannabinoid, is released in humans after an orgasm, suggesting that these compounds may be involved in normal sexual processes. Also, cannabis is a vasodilator, and what that means is that it's going to open up your blood vessels and increase blood flow. And so it has direct effects on the cannabinoid receptors in the skin and nerve pathways that can be involved in perceiving pain. This is also going to affect, touching and things like that. So it might give you a higher sense of feeling those things on your skin. But it can also affect some higher order functionings, including memory and feelings of fear and anxiety. Again, those are all things that need to be studied further and all that fun stuff. But it's easy to see those things and see how they would affect sex. So pain, anxiety, your nerve, your touch inhibitors, and, easy blood flow, especially for men who may have some sort of an erectile dysfunction or something like that. So it's easy to see all of these things and how they interact with your brain and how it would affect your sex life. There has been some animal studies, though. So a lot of things that we do know between sex and cannabis is from these animal studies. So it's been suggested that stimulating the CB1 receptor delays ejaculation, and the CB1 receptor is an endocannabinoid receptor that's in our brain, which that could lead to more satisfaction for humans. But there's also been studies where they showed that heavy cannabis use can actually delay ejaculation quite a bit. So there seems to be that there needs to be a happy medium. So if somebody uses too much, it might have problems, but if somebody uses a little, it might help. Also, there has been some evidence in humans that suggest heavy use of cannabis and frequent use of cannabis can lead to negative sperm production, so it can actually lower your sperm production. But there was another study in 2019, because 2015 was the one that the first study that came out that showed that heavy cannabis use might lead to lower sperm count. But in this 2019 study that was published in Human Reproduction, did not find the same results. They had a longitudinal survey of 662 men who provided semen samples between 2000 and 2017. And those who reported ever using cannabis had significantly higher sperm count than those who had never smoked. So yeah, there might actually be reproductive benefits, but it's really hard to tell because, again, we come up with these. The reason why we're able to find scientific findings the way we do is by having multiple studies done multiple times and all proven in the same way. So like these studies need to keep being redone. And so because the whole point is for the studies to have the same end results. And then we can really figure out if this is going to be medically beneficial and sexually beneficial for people to maybe get a high sperm count, to maybe last longer, for the partner, and all that other stuff. So here is some stuff, if you want to try cannabis before having sex, it's really important to know if you're doing it legally. If you're living in a state that has recreational use of cannabis. You probably already know about it. But it is legal for medical use in 33 states plus the District of Columbia. And it's legal for adult recreational use in 10 states plus the District of Columbia. So that is just for the U.S. I know in Canada it's legal everywhere. And of course, you got some places in Europe too. But yeah, that's mostly it. So you should look into that if you'll get into legal trouble and all that fun stuff. We are not condoning illegal actions here at the GSMC Relationship Podcast. But I think the one thing that you should probably remember is if you have never used cannabis and then you want to use it just to see if you'll find some sexual benefit from it, you should use it by yourself first, and you should masturbate with it first, and then before you bring in somebody else, and because you don't know if you'll even like it. Let's say you try it, you hate it, and you would rather not have that with your partner, because you don't know how you'll react to it. And yeah, it takes some time. So, some people, it will increase, anxiety and paranoia. So if that is the case for you, that might not be very good to have in, a sexual encounter. Also, it's really important to do it with someone you trust. Just because you might be high does not mean consent is still a thing. Is still a thing, because it is. So it's important to have a conversation with your partner before you try smoking. And if there's ever a point in time where you want to stop, you can always say so. So it's important to differentiate also between whether you want to use cannabis to enhance your sexual experience or to help manage a diagnosable sexual dysfunction. Because you can always talk to a sex therapist and see your doctor, because, there might be something else there for you, or some other medicine that you can try, especially if cannabis is not legal where you live. There might be something else out there for you that you can talk through a sex therapist with, or some sort of doctor. I know that is easier said than done, especially for women, as women's sexual diseases or more reproductive diseases and diseases and dysfunctions that are mainly found in women, and also queer women and people who are trans folks and stuff like that. It's going to be harder for them to talk to a doctor about their sexual dysfunctions, and because it's hard for a doctor to listen to your problems and to really believe them. So that, I know that isn't always the case for everyone, but if you can find a sex therapist who works with queer people or who works with women, I would highly recommend that, because they might be able to help you out. But just do your research though before you find someone in your area, and make sure that they are open to, your issues in particular and how they affect you. That being said, there are a lot of cannabis sex products, in this article, this self article. There is, pens that are like THC and CBD pens, that are literally just to help you have sex and stuff like that. So, there's Dosist Arouse Pen. It's a formula called Passion that has a 10-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD. There's Foria Pleasure. This one has coconut oil and THC. There is Papa and Bakery Body Relief Oil. This is going to be like balm that you put on your skin. So yeah, there's so much. There's flour, there's vape cartridges, there's chocolate, there's oils, there's everything. So, I mean, even if it doesn't have any effect on, your sex life and things like that, and sexual arousal and the experience, they sure do have a lot of products for them. So if that's something you can get at a dispensary, or even if you just try like CBD oil or something like that, because there is CBD, I'm pretty sure, that can be sold in almost every state, because legally you can sell CBD that has less than 0.03% THC. And you can also get CBD that has no THC in it whatsoever if you're worried about getting drug tested and stuff like that. Keep in mind though that if your company or whoever you're getting drug tested for, whether they're just testing for THC or if they're testing for cannabinoids, because if they're testing for cannabinoids and you take CBD with no THC in it, it's going to show up. But if they're just testing for THC, it won't show up if you're taking a CBD oil that has 0% THC in it. So something to keep in mind. But yeah, that is going to end this segment though. But stick around because in the next segment, we're going to be talking about how to not get defensive during an argument. And we're going to end the show with 10 ideas for couples costumes that you can try this Halloween. And we'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we're back. So in this segment, we're actually going to be talking about ways to not get so defensive while you're in an argument. And I'm sure most of you have been in this situation before where you're in an argument and, you know, you get really defensive, whether it's like, well, what is that supposed to mean? Or like, oh, well, yeah, you're right. I'm always wrong or blah, 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 you know, that kind of thing. So and that can really make it difficult to have a conversation where you can move forward from it. And most likely it's going to lead to one or both of you to like get really angry and blow up. So how are ways that you can stop yourself from getting defensive before it starts? I got this inspiration for this segment off of a TikToker that I found. It is from, let's see here, at Flutter Dating. So at Flutter Dating did a couple different parts about getting defensive while fighting and how to try to stop that. And a really important point that she brought up is that usually when we're listening to someone, we're listening to come up with an answer and we're not listening to understand. This is going to be called active listening. So when we're in an argument, we want to make sure that we're actively listening and we're not just listening to our partner to come up with a really great comeback or like, oh, well, see, I'm smarter and I'm going to win this conversation and I know everything, blah, 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 blah. So instead, really try to listen to what your partner is saying. And if that means you have to take a pause before you answer to take that in and then answer, you know, that's okay. As long as you're not listening to rebut that, but you're listening to understand. Another really great way to do this is to take notes while you're arguing. But before I get into that, I would recommend, I think I've said this before in a different episode, but I would recommend making almost scheduling time to argue. So if you know, like, okay, tonight at 5:30, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about this. And, knowing then that you have time to emotionally prepare, and hopefully then you won't be as angry. If you, when the problem first arises, you might get really emotional and you might get really defensive. But if you wait a couple hours for you guys to have that conversation, you might be coming in with a fresh perspective, and you won't be as emotional going in. So the note-taking thing, make notes about what exactly they're saying. And that is going to, just by writing notes and writing down what the person is saying, it's going to help you actively listen. If you're writing notes down what they're saying, your brain can only do so much at one time. And you're going to be able, by you writing down what they're saying, you're going to be taking in what they're saying and not also thinking about how you are going to respond to that. And this way you can kind of take a look back, understand what they're trying to say, and, go from there. Also, it's really important to, if you don't understand something, instead of saying the phrase, well, what's that supposed to mean? That's a pretty common phrase. But instead of saying that, be like, I don't really understand where you're coming from. Can you reiterate that? Because they too might be emotionally charged. If they say something that might be hurtful, and you feel yourself going into that defensive mode, they might be feeling very emotional too. They might have let their emotions get the best of them, and they might have said something that they didn't mean either, or something that you think had some weird underlying tones. Ask them to, try to explain themselves. Just be like, I didn't really understand that. What did you mean when you said that? And this might give them a chance too, if they said something that you believe is like really problematic or hit you in a very low spot. Unfortunately, sometimes that's going to happen in an argument where people are going to bring out that kind of thing. Ask them to reiterate, and ask them to kind of explain, like, I didn't understand that. Like, were you trying to say something else? Like, what are you trying to say here? And have them go from that, and don't immediately get defensive. Just try to let them, explain themselves a little bit, and then go from there. Again, all by actively listening and taking notes. The other thing that you should be doing when you are taking notes is when you feel yourself getting defensive, it's going to be being mindful about why you're feeling that. If you are someone who has listened to other episodes of mine, you know how strongly I feel about being mindful with our emotions. So some things you should be writing down when you feel yourself getting defensive while facing criticism in an argument. So the first one is going to be ask yourself, why am I getting defensive? What am I trying to prove? And is getting angry going to add value to this conversation? So what did they say to you that made you get defensive? Cause you know what that feels like. Cause for me, it like, I get almost like prickly. Like I get, that it goes over your body and you immediately want to like put your armor on. And before you put on that armor and go to immediate like battle mode, try to think about what about what they said is making you get so defensive and making you feel, is it something that you are self-conscious about? Is that why you're getting defensive? Is it something that, something else that's going on in your life that made you get defensive like that? And kind of examine that and figure out where that is originally coming from. Because if you can figure out where it's coming from, you can stop it before it even starts. And then the next one is going to be, what am I trying to prove? Again, I think I've kind of talked about this before. Disagreements and arguments is a lot about power and control. And are you arguing just because you want to be right? Or are you arguing because this is actually meaningful to the relationship? So that's another important thing to examine. And then finally, is getting angry and blowing up going to add value to the conversation. Very rarely it won't. But it's really hard to separate our emotions, from that sometimes. And, it's okay to be upset. That's a normal thing. But you don't want to hurt, your person, because it's you and your person against the world, not you and them against each other. So you guys have to work as a team to get over this conflict. You're not working together. There's not your side versus their side. It's both of you trying to come up with a solution to the problem. And that's something that you really need to keep in mind before you say something that might be very hurtful. Because, you do know your person, better than most people, and vice versa. And so it's really easy to bring out the stuff that might hurt them, especially if you feel yourself getting defensive. You're going to bring up something too. And it's important to kind of think before we speak. And that is why it's so important to be mindful and to take notes while you're having an argument, because if you're being mindful and you're taking notes, it's less likely that you're going to say something that you regret later. Kind of going back to what I was talking about with asking your partner to explain when you aren't sure what they meant. Instead of, even if it was something that might have been kind of hurtful, it could be something totally different. Just by asking them to explain because you're not sure that you understand, it is going to attempt to disregard the meaning that you have personally assigned to what they are saying. So for them to be able to put it in some different words might be able to help you understand where they're coming from. So it's something, to keep in mind and to always be active listening. It's going off active listening. It's really important, to try to be as present as possible. Don't let your mind wander. This is going to happen a lot when you're trying to think of something to say back to them or how to rebuke them. So by staying present and really taking in all of their words, which taking notes can help you do this, you just have to remember that you are going to get your turn to talk. But you will eventually be able to speak, but for the time being, just listen and try to really actively listen and understand what they're saying. And if you feel like you and your partner just are not seeing eye to eye and are just not, just are totally on different ends of the spectrum, instead of trying to understand why someone doesn't think like you, try to understand why you should think like them. So try to put yourselves in their shoes, kind of put on your best effort at, having empathy, I guess, or that sounds bad, but try to put yourselves in their shoes and in their mindset as much as you can. Because by doing that, you might be able to understand where they're coming from, and maybe you might be able to see that you guys aren't really that different in this disagreement after all. I'm sure there are going to be points that you can agree with each other and understand that you guys are coming from the same place and you want a similar goal. And, you can move on with that information as you like. Also something that may be helpful if you feel, your emotions might be taking the best of you. You feel like you're going to blow up soon. You feel like you're just getting really overwhelmed. Do some breathing exercises. Breathe in for 5, hold for 5, out for 5. If you need to do that a few times just to kind of get your heart rate down and relax yourself, that's okay. Also, feel free to take a break from the argument if you need that. Set a timer if you need to do that too. Or, just say that you're going to talk about this, tomorrow. As long as the conversation does end, that's the most important thing. So, you shouldn't just, we'll talk about this another time and then never actually talk talk about it again, and then that being a source of an argument later on down the road. And also, if you are able to finish the argument, making sure that you don't bring that up in an argument later on. If you guys have settled an argument and settled a disagreement, stop bringing it up after that, basically. And also, another thing is that you can ask your partner to like hold your hands. I'm someone who is very into physical touch as a love language. And, if your partner is able to like hold your hand while you're talking, or, you know, at least put their hand on your arm or something, it might help you might help soothe you, and might show that they are there for you, and that, you know, you're not trying to be combative. If you guys need to hold hands while you're doing that, there has been, I feel like there has been exercises where when you're having really tough disagreements and really tough arguments, to hold both hands and look at each other in their eye while arguing, and just never let go of each other's hands, even when you're like really, really angry. You know, obviously you can take a break if you were getting extremely emotional and very angry, and that's okay. But, you know, it might help to have some sort of physical contact with your partner while you are having these hard conversations with them. And it might help you get through this whole situation that you guys are in. And those are just some tips on, you know, not getting defensive while you're in an argument. You know, just remember to breathe, remember to listen, stay present, and remember that you guys are a team against the world, not the other way around. So I think with those, first things, I kind of think of it as, lightning rods. If you picture on top of a barn, there are a bunch of different lightning rods. You know, you could have no lightning rods and just hope that the lightning doesn't strike, the roof or strike the barn and, you know, light the thing on fire, I guess. Or you could set up lightning rods, and the more lightning rods you have set up, the more, you know, the better it's going to be, you know, to move that lightning away from where you want it to be. So by implementing these tools, you're putting up another lightning rod. By taking notes, that's a lightning rod. By actively listening, that's another lightning rod. By holding hands, that's another lightning rod. So you find out what works for you and put these things in place. So you have a higher chance of, when lightning strikes, you know, that it goes to a place that you want it, and not to a place that is going to cause this huge fire and that is completely out of control. So I'm big with metaphors, and I really like that metaphor. So, you know, do with that what you will. So that is going to conclude this segment though, but stick around, because in the next segment, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, and that is Halloween. I just heard that Starbucks has pumpkin spice now in their stores. I'm not actually a big pumpkin spice person. I am on the apple cider train. I think apple cider is a little bit better than pumpkin spice, but that's just my personal opinion. If you like your pumpkin spice lattes, I'm not going to judge you for that. But that means that Halloween is right around the corner. So, and I'm definitely someone who puts a lot of thought and planning into my costumes. So if you're anything like me, you're thinking about your costumes, even if it's going to be a COVID Halloween, at least here in the States. So we are going to pause for a quick sponsor break, and then we'll be right back to talk about couples Halloween costumes.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
And we are back to talk about my favorite topic. Oh, I love couples costumes. I love Halloween costumes. I love group costumes. They're just so much fun. And I'm hoping these are going to be a little bit more unique. Maybe you haven't thought about these couple costumes before. And what I try to do too when I make my costume is I don't like the quality of the costumes that you get at stores. I really try to do as much thrifting as I can. I will do a lot of online shopping when I plan out my costumes. But I will try to like collect pieces from all over the internet and, all over the thrift shops that are in my area and try to come up with a really cool and unique costume that isn't that expensive. So I hope maybe that you can take those tips too, and if you find something on here that on this 10 list of couples costumes that you can do, but yeah, I try to make it as cheap as possible and just have fun with it. Oh, I love Halloween. Okay, so the first one, I was actually this with a guy I was dating last year, and we won a costume contest, so that was really cool, and it turned out really awesome. But Morticia and Gomez Adams, this is such a cool costume. I do know like Joe Jonas and his wife did it, and they look pretty good too. But it's really not that hard. Like I just got a black dress off of Amazon. We were able to find for him a suit jacket at Salvo's, so, and we did our makeup and, like he like slicked his hair back and I like got, black, semi-permanent dye. It was something that like it was like overtone where you put in your hair, so it made my hair look darker. It was really cool and we looked really good, and it was just I still have the dress and I've actually worn it too because it was just a plain black dress. So it was really simple, really easy, wasn't that expensive, and we had so much fun with it. The next one is going to be really great if you were someone in their mid-20s like I am, and that is Shark Boy and Lava Girl. I saw this on Pinterest the other day, and it's just something I've never really thought of, and I love this idea of being Shark Boy and Lava Girl. I'm not sure how you'd be able to pull this one off with not a lot of money. I would imagine that as long as you got like a morph suit, like one of those like body leotards, a unitard, that's the word I'm looking for, like a pink one and a blue one, and you guys were able to like, you could probably even make like fins with like cardboard and lava with ribbons and stuff. But just to get like that those creative juices flowing, I think this is so funny. I didn't even think about Shark Boy and Lava Girl. I love that. Number 3, this one is from Stranger Things. I do like Stranger Things. I haven't seen like the newest season. I think I've only seen season 1 and season 2. But I have seen part of season 3, and in season 3, Steve and Robin, they work at an ice cream shop and they have these like those sailor uniforms, and they look so cute and they're really good, really fun couple in the show. And I wouldn't imagine that being too difficult to find on Amazon. And if you don't like Amazon, like I'm sure you can get it on Etsy and stuff like that, because Amazon is problematic thanks to Jeff Bezos. But I understand. I fall victim to Amazon as well sometimes. But they it shouldn't be too difficult to find. But the next one is actually going to be really easy because you got Vincent Vega and Mia Wallace from Pulp Fiction. I mean, come on. I mean, especially if you have like a black bob wig, a black bob wig. That would be super easy for Mia. And for Vincent Vega, you just need a suit and one of those, I can't think of the name. They're like the cowboy ties that you wear around your neck, the ones he wears in the movies. But I feel like that wouldn't be hard to do, especially if you have access to some sort of thrift store near you. I'm sure you can find all that stuff on a thrift store, like the white button up and all that fun stuff. This one is pretty cute. This one is going to be Mary Poppins and Bert. I feel like being Bert would be so much fun, because you can put like, a black eyeshadow all over your face so you look like a chimney sweep. And Mary Poppins, this is great, if you don't really feel like, putting together a costume, because I'm sure you can find a pretty decent quality Mary Poppins costume online. And Bert, I mean, you would need some like slacks and like suspenders and like one of those chimney sweep hats and like maybe a chimney sweep brush, and people would be able to know who you were instantly. So yeah. And also, another thing to keep in mind, these can be gender swapped too. Like, that would be super fun, you can have a Vincent Vega and a Mia Wallace that are both guys. You can have a Steve and Robin that are both girls, like whatever it is. Like, this can also be done with your friends, like whatever. I just think it's all fun. So the next one probably isn't as unique, I guess, but it's going to be Grease, Danny and Sandy. The cool thing about Grease though is that Sandy has a few different looks that you can pick out. So like, you have when she is in those black pants and the black top with the red heels, like you can have that look. You can have good Sandy. You can have Sandy at the prom where she's in that white dress, so you have a couple different options. I mean, Danny, it's a little bit more limited, but as long as you have like a leather jacket and cuff those jeans and get some, Converse or something like that, you are good to go. So it is easy, but there may be other Danny and Sandys from Grease in that costume party you go to, so just keep that in mind. I feel like this one is going to be pretty unique though. It's Princess Bride. I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies. So dress up as Wesley and Buttercup. I love it. And Buttercup, I actually saw some pictures. You can have like the long red dress, but I also saw people who had shorter red dresses on, and that looks super cute too. So if you want to do something a little bit, show a little bit more leg, you can get like a shorter red dress. And Wesley, anyone is going to look amazing in those ballooned white tunic arms and the mask, and you can get like a fake sword. Oh, it would look so good. I want to do this so bad. Moving on, we got Captain America and Miss Carter. Oh, Captain America is like one of my favorite. I'm a big MCU person. Like, Captain America would be I love it. So number one, it's easy. You can get a Captain American costume anywhere. And for Miss Carter, if you are someone who's like really into 50s fashion, you might already have some of the stuff now. Rockability is really popular right now, so I'm sure it would be really easy to find this kind of stuff on Etsy and like her like a dress for her. And there's so much online on YouTube of like how to do your hair like a pinup. It's really easy to do your makeup and make it pinup, and and then you can do the dance. You can have Peggy's in Captain America's dance. Oh, my heart. I want to be able to handle it. And this one, we are throwing away Joker and Harley Quinn. I saw Birds of Prey, and it's like my favorite movie. I have a lot of opinions on it. I actually talked about it on a different podcast with Dustin Whitcomb. And so you can check out his podcast if you want to hear me talk about Birds of Prey for about 25 minutes. But we are going to do Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn. Come on. Okay, like and this might be a hot take and a lot of people might not agree with it, but I think Poison Ivy from like the Tim Burton, George Clooney, that movie where she has like the green unitard with the vines all over her and the like bright red wig. What a look. I mean, come on. That is perfect. And Harley Quinn, there's so many different looks for her too. I mean, you have so much to choose from. I have dressed up as Harley Quinn before and it turned out really cool and I really liked it. It's still one of my favorite costumes. But like, it's, Harley Quinn and Joker is a little bit problematic. So we're gonna throw that whole thing away and do Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn. I love this so much. And last but not least, Dwight and Angela from The Office. I feel like this is going to be a little bit more unique, but I saw this picture somewhere and they just looked so good. And then the entire night, I'm sure people will be telling you identity theft is not a joke, Jim. And it's going to be great. And like Angela, it's going to be, that is an easy one to do at your local your thrift shop, because you can get like the yellow short sleeve button up, and for Angela you could get like a sweater vest or some sort of sweater and like pin your hair back, especially if you have like blonde hair. That's going to be perfect. Or you can get like a blonde wig. It would be so funny. But anyway, that is not a complete list of things that you could wear to Halloween this year, but it is a list to, you know, get the juices flowing, because I love Halloween and I love group costumes and couples costumes and stuff like that. So yeah, do it up. If you know, Halloween is a little bit away, but you know, if you do decide to dress up or you do a costume party or something, send me pictures, because GSMC Relationship Podcast is on Instagram or on Twitter or on Facebook, all that fun stuff. You can interact with me. And yeah, I'd be happy to see some of your pictures of your costumes. You know, maybe I'll post a picture of the Gomez and Morticia Adams that he did last year, because we turned out, I'm pretty proud of it. But maybe I'll put that in on the Instagram so you guys can see it. But anyway, guys, that is going to conclude the podcast. You have been listening to the GSMC Relationship Podcast. Like I said before, please give us a follow on all of the social medias. Also, if you could subscribe and rate and review on iTunes, that would be so cool. I would love to read and see some actual reviews in Apple. That would be pretty cool. But yeah, so, if not, we will see you again next time. And you guys stay safe out there. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.